All right, welcome to our first edition of Cwic Week. This is a wrap-up of all of the subjects, the episodes that we've covered during the week. Today is August 28th, 2021. No story was bigger this week for us than the speech by Elder Holland at Brigham Young University, focused at staff and faculty. The response has been very split, but of course the loudest response of this has been critical of Elder Holland. This to me is very much a flashpoint talk. It could change things at BYU one way or the other. As you know, as we've covered BYU here for several months, there is a lot more happening there than people realize in terms of moving into a hard left area and more of an academic ideology. Now, for some of you, you probably like that. That's what you want. The question is that what the church wants? And are they going to allow that slippery slide into the hard left to continue? Now, Elder Holland's speech to me was primarily about the doctrine of the family. I had a comment on one of the episodes that I did that says, I disagree. This is not about the family proclamation, but about defending the church. Well, I think it's both. I don't think it's just about defending the church. I mean, the examples that were given were all about the doctrine of the family. And notice how when the apostles and the prophets speak about that family, they don't talk just about the proclamation on the family. They specifically say, if you notice, the doctrine of the family. And so that seems to me that they're saying this is rock solid, right? This is not a policy like we had with the blacks in the priesthood or with polygamy or other things as such, but rather this seems a little bit more like they do not want to move on this. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with this. It seems to me like this is kind of a pushback to a move toward becoming like the rest of academia, and that might be where BYU ends up. It might be the only way to survive with certain objectives that they have of being a prestigious university. If they want to be a prestigious university, they're going to have to acquiesce to several things. And it's not going to be what we think of as BYU anymore. And that might be a route they end up taking. I don't know. But not in the short term anyway, not according to Elder Holland's talk. In the Salt Lake Tribune, Michael Austin, who is a BYU alum and current vice president of a Methodist university, had this to say. He said, BYU takes the position that the university is the church, right? It's the same thing. And there's no line between them. And that is different than some universities out there where they're just universities. For example, Notre Dame and Baylor. These are religious institutions, religious universities that do not follow policy on campus and in teaching that is completely congruent to the doctrine of their churches. That's a possibility for BYU. And then you have other more evangelical universities like a Liberty or Oral Roberts and those types of universities that take much more of a hard line, but they're not prestigious universities. So where is BYU going to end up? And then back to the other point that I made about there being some underlying themes about why Elder Holland said what he did. I strongly believe that the identitarianism that is happening in the United States, especially the intersectionality, the critical race theory, the breaking up into groups and identities. I think there has been a hard discussion on this. I don't know that, although secondhand perhaps, but I do think that that is where they are based on their words. If you were to go back and read from October 2020, President Nelson's conference talk on Let God Prevail. Remember, that was about Israel. It was about gathering. It's assimilation into certain principles, into being a Zion people. But he brings up right in the middle of that talk, he brings up racism and how we need to root out racism. Very interesting that those two are brought together. But what he specifically states in there, what they always specifically state when they bring up, for example, sexual orientation or race, is we are all children of God. And so you're going to have this battle. that culture is trying to break down right now. They're trying to break down the norms of identity. And that's what intersectionality is all about. The church seems to me to have made a very specific, conscious effort to always say we are children of God and we can never allow another identity to supersede that. That's the issue. And so when Elder Holland talks about the valedictorian, Matty Easton, who came out as gay in his valedictorian speech, he's not talking about shutting him up because he's gay or not giving him a voice because he's gay. What he's talking about, I believe, is saying, look, we can't have this in the church, and BYU is part of the church. We can't have everybody splitting off and running through a power structure of levels of victimhood and power based on the groups that you're a part of. This is breaking out into ites like we get in the Book of Mormon. The church wants a Zion people. That's exactly the opposite. That doesn't mean that they disregard or discount what your real lived experience is or what your identities are, what makes you who you are. But they are all subject to being a child of God. As an example of the murky waters that we're traveling through, not just in the church, not just at BYU, but in our culture, the response from Jana Rice on the talk is very telling. She's basically going to use critical race theory or intersectionality to critique and define the talk by Elder Holland. What do I mean by that? Well, she's going to break it down into ites. And it's not that it's not warranted. It is. There are reasons to do this. And there's a lot of people that work with critical race theory, so to speak, or intersectionality, where they're dealing with data like this. And how do we help this out and bring some equality to certain groups? That's not a bad thing in and of itself. But the problem is where does that pull us to? This is actually reinforcing exactly what I think the church is doing, what the leaders of the church are doing in that idea of keeping your identity as a child of God first. Let's look at what she says. Elder Holland's speech tells us about gender. Okay, so again, here's our filters on everything that's going to come through the church. It's going to be through General Conference. It's going to be the Book of Mormon. It's going to be everything. This is all coming, right? At least 15 men are cited in the speech from Holland's fellow church leaders. Since women make up a half of the general population and are more common than men among the membership of the church, we would expect their citations to be equal or greater than the citations of men, right? So representation has to be exactly equal to the population of the church. So then she says that women are wholly invisible. Hey, there's something there to that, right? I mean, there's no citations given to a woman on this. That might be a smart thing to do. She goes on to say that Elder Holland refers to the university as a female, as her, then claiming that it's because he sees the university as being vulnerable. Look, cities have always been called women because they're vessels of people. That's the way it's always been anciently. But for her, she's going to dissect this into an intersectional oppressor versus oppressed type of a filter. Now she goes on and says, now let's look at other social locators. Every individual who is named in the speech is white. There's not a single person of color. Okay, that's something that should be considered. Right? That's a good way of looking at this. The problem is where is that going to lead us? It's breaking everything down. Again, it's a focus on different identities. It's not that it doesn't need to have attention to it. I believe it does. But this is how everything is going to be broken down, and that is coming to the church. You see it right here. This is going to make for very interesting and turbulent times in terms of how we view the church, how we view Scripture, how we view the General Conference talks. That's inevitable in my mind. Another one, in the same month, in October 2020, you have President Oaks talking about addressing BYU in a devotional. The name of his talk was Racism and Other Challenges, and the exact same thing happens there. He talks about parsing these things out, and he talks about getting rid of certain ideologies. You don't adopt certain ideologies. Elder Holland said in as many words the exact same thing. We can support LGBTQ individuals. We can love them, but there are certain lifestyles and ideologies that you don't support, or political ideologies that are against the doctrine of Christ. That's what he was talking about. So look for that in these comments by the leaders of the church about being a child of God as your primary identity, and seeing things in that regard where other identities might pull away from that or supersede that identity. That's what I think was really going on there. Now, lastly, under that topic, I think we definitely need to give more of a voice to faithful gay Latter-day Saints, those of the LGBTQ community who are covenant keepers, who are supportive of the church, who would mostly be supportive of Elder Holland here. They need a bigger voice. They need a home, and we need to put our arms around them, and we need to support them. That is very, very important moving forward. If we don't do that more, if we don't offer more charity there on that end, then we're going to have a tougher battle moving forward. All right, another topic that we went to was the Office of Belonging, which was also announced the same day as Elder Holland's talk, which was kind of interesting. And again, I think what they're doing here is, this is kind of what we can do. We're willing to go this far over here. We're not going to have an office, which was requested, of diversity and belonging, or diversity, equity, and belonging, or race, equity, and belonging. It's just going to be belonging. Those words matter. And I talk a little bit about language in some of those episodes. And I've had my ear to the ground on this a little bit. I have some sources there at BYU that know a little bit about this. And, I hear from both sides on this. There are some there at BYU that have a lot of trepidation over the Office of Belonging. What is this going to become? Is this going to be like other offices across the country of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And how does that fit in a gospel sense? Not real well, based on what Elder Holland was saying and what the leaders of the church are saying. And you look at the suggestions from the committee on race, equity, and belonging that did their research and made suggestions. Look, there's some really good things in there. Very, very good things in there. But there are some things that really are very concerning. So the question is going to be, which items there are going to be put into practice? And so if you want to go to the BYU website, look that up. It's right there on their website. You can see the document that was produced, the report that was produced by the Committee on Race, Equity, and Belonging. On the other hand, I have other people that I've spoken to that think this is great. There's nothing to worry about. It's going to be something that helps marginalized people, which is something that we want. Time will tell. I also quickly covered Afghanistan in just a quick episode. Just horrified at the images that we saw there. Now, I don't know what you think about being in Afghanistan. You may think that we should have been there in the first place after 9/11. You may think that it stabilizes the area and helps a lot of people. There are a lot of people that want us there. Or you might be on the other end of the spectrum, where you think that we shouldn't be there at all. Or if we were to be there, we were there to get Osama bin Laden, straighten some things out, and then hightail it out of there. But regardless of what you think, the fact that we were there for 20 years, have been there for 20 years, and this is what happens at the very end, is really an absolute fiasco. Here's Mitt Romney on this. He said, "We were wrong, both President Trump and President Biden, to take our troops out of Afghanistan." Okay, I mean, what does that gain for him? What is that? What does that mean? You're seeing the images on here. That's not a real brave statement by Senator Romney here. We need better policies on moving forward, better reasons for being in places. And if we're not going to be able to affect positive change, which maybe we shouldn't be doing in the first place, then we shouldn't be there in the first place. In addition, this week I had Ralph Hancock, the professor of political philosophy at Brigham Young University, on the podcast. I interviewed him in a long-form interview that I thought was very, very enlightening. He has some great thoughts. If you like philosophy at all, or politics, I think that's a good place for you to go and get some anchor points as to why we are where we are today. What is the DNA that brings us up to this point? I broke that off, for those of you that don't want to listen to something for 2 hours, into a couple of different episodes. One of them was the hard slide to the left that he goes over. He is obviously not on the left. And he talks about how BYU has taken this hard left turn, and how do we expect anything different based on the practices that BYU has incorporated. And then I also break out another episode on revelation and reason, which I really enjoyed in talking about that. Again, bringing in some philosophy here, but bringing in, Genesis 1:1. To me, it's Genesis 1:1. It's in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. It's revelation and reason, or as Thomas Aquinas would say, faith and reason, and how those two things have to work together. I thought it was a very fruitful discussion. Lastly, our Come Follow Me this week was on section 93, light. And just a couple points on that. I think that based on the reading that I have of section 93 and going back to section 88, where we also talk about light from a week or two ago, and then an understanding to me of Lehi's vision, his dream, and the tree of life. To me, if you bring these things together, a little bit of Isaiah in here, a little bit of John as well, in Gospel of John, chapter 1, you see that the light is created from the love of God. And it really is that the love of God is what makes the world go round. The light of Christ that each man and woman has is there because of what the Son of God did. Because he came down to earth, took on a body, was baptized. That's part of it, definitely part of the condescension of God. And then, of course, in the Garden of Gethsemane and on the cross, where he lowered himself below all. This is what creates the light. And that light has a hierarchal structure in how it works. We get this a lot in the creation accounts, where we talk about the sun and the moon and the stars. These are not necessarily literal representations of the creation. They're talking about something else. You see at the beginning of Genesis 1, the beginning of light coming in across the abyss or across the deep, across chaos. You can also go to the book of Revelation and see something very similar in these hierarchical structures. You can see it in Abraham 3 with Kolob and all of that kind of funky kind of explanatory hierarchical structure that's put in place with these planets. And then you have the power or the light that goes from one place to another. Where does it get its power from? Where does it get its light? It's a social contract based on covenant. It's a representation of us. Right? Based on covenant and based on love and faith, based on the priesthood. And to me, as I see these problems this week, where we have so much lack of institutional trust, right? That is dropping very quickly. In some cases, very well substantiated, no question. And as information devolves, when I say devolves, when it moves down into all of our hands so easily, it's easy to start mistrusting the institutions. I hope that we can trust the church, right? We can trust the prophet. We can solidify ourselves with that in our covenants with our God, with our Savior. That is the structure of those hierarchies. The sun, the moon, the stars, all the planets, how that all works together. And all of that is built off of sacrifice. It's all built off of charity and the love of God. I'll talk to you next week.